This video is going to show how to finally actually assemble together individual Lego components into the airplane. So ultimately you're going to end up with something that looks like that from all the individual components that you've already modeled. What you're going to want to do, so we're going to work on page 15 to start in this video. What you're going to want to do is open SolidWorks and preemptively open the 2x10 part, the 2x2 triple part, which is this other one right here, and the inverted wedge. Now I've already opened them on my SolidWorks. I've got them open here. How you would do this is go File and Open. You would need to find your folder where you had saved your Lego parts. So that's an important last step. Now I've got it shown as large icons right now, which makes it easier to pick the parts out. The way that you could see that in File Explorer is you're likely going to be just showing a list that doesn't graphically show here. But if you come to this selector, change your view, and I came to large icons, that actually then shows each of these components in the folder, which will make it easier if you didn't use good file naming convention to show you which parts. But you're going to need to open these parts. You could highlight one of them, 2x10 here, and click open, but I've already got that open. Okay, now that you've got these 3 files open that you're going to need for page 15, I'm going to go File and New. And what we're going to be making now is an assembly. The very first step that I recommend you do once opening a new assembly is going to be to go File, Save. No. After doing this, as soon as we do this next step, you're going to want to save your work. You can see that to begin the assembly, we have got already these 3 items open. What you're going to want to start off with is the 2x10. Notice how I'm clicking on this and I am dragging it into the modeling environment, which is now going to be as if you had the piece of Lego in front of you and setting it on the table. When I click right now, that was a left mouse button click. It has now placed that Lego piece inside of the modeling environment. Now, if I do a Control 7 to go to isometric view, this Lego is kind of showing this direction, but we're going to want to make it look, for the ease of assembly here, notice that it's kind of opposite how I really want it to be based off of the instructions here. The way that I'm going to do this is we've dropped this in and you can see the letter F in front of the part and the feature manager tree. I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to make this element or this part float in the modeling environment. This is going to enable it now. You can see that goes to a negative sign. Previously it couldn't move around, it just kind of was dropped in space. But now I'm actually able to click and drag and move this around. Now you could see the planes as reference later, but what we're going to do here is we're now going to do what's called a mate to actually orient these parts in space. And what I'm going to want to do, front plane is right here. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be mating the front plane to this small front face of the part. And we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to click on this thing that says mate, the paper clip. This is what's going to actually allow things to get assembled together in space. Now notice I had the front plane was previously selected. So front plane right now and mate selections is here. I'm going to come in and carefully select this leading face of the part. And when I do that, it kind of flipped around here. That is what's called a coincident mate, meaning that those are going to be touching each other. I'm actually going to want this now, these alignment and anti-aligned. That's kind of close, but what I want then is anti-alignment. And that now brings that, if I do the letter F on the keyboard to fit. Notice that the part is kind of at a weird angle right now, but we're going to fix that in a moment by mating. So once I did that, I like that mate. I'm going to click that. Now I'm still in mate mode right now because I have this keep visible pinned. If I didn't have that pinned, it might disappear, but you're going to want to click on this keep pinned, keep visible icon to keep doing more mates. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another force a coincident mate. And I'm now going to use the top plane. I'm going to select the top plane in this pull down. If you're not seeing it, there's the pull down menu right there. I want to mate the top plane. I'm going to use the orbit feature. I'm holding down my center mouse button and orbiting around. There are several surfaces you could select to do this, but I'm going to select the bottommost edge of the part coming all the way around. When I do that, it's out of view right here. I just did the letter F to make it visible. Notice that top plane and the bottom face of that part are now coincident or touching each other perfectly. I'm going to hit the green check mark either here or right here to add to finish the mate. Now I've got one more mate that I'm going to need to do, and this now is still able to move side to side like that. I'm going to do a mate between the right plane. I zoom out a little bit. So right plane's all the way back there now. Oops. Well, I'm going to do between right plane and this face right here. That is now mated together. If I do the letter F, we now have something that looks very similar to how this is oriented on page 15 of the instructions. Okay, so now that I've got that, the 2x10 is in place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and insert components. And now since I've already pre-opened, I have those files open, I'm going to come to the 2x3 inverted wedge, which is going to be, I'm going to be putting this part into the assembly. So this is where your naming convention would have been important. So I click on that once, and I'm going to drop it somewhere in this view. There. Okay. Now, if I orbit around, these parts are just, this part is out in space and can be, with my left mouse button, clicked and dragged and moved around. But I want to show you to preemptively, or to just get it into a better position that's going to make a little bit more sense. If I right mouse button click on the part and come down to move with triad, it's going to give me this icon that I'm going to be able to click and drag. And what I recommend is you see this rotator here. I'm going to just click and drag on that rotational to get this a little bit closer to what I actually want in terms of the alignment. Now, to get these parts mated together, what I recommend, you're going to use this pattern, and I'm clicking and moving this upwards. This is a left mouse button click and drag that's going to allow us to move. We're going to use, under mates, what's called a concentric mate. And I'm going to go, what I recommend for easiest right now is going to be using a concentric mate for that surface, that circular surface right there on the inverted wedge, to this similar boss. I'm going to make those concentric to each other. And what's going to happen is that they pull together. It means they're kind of like bullseyes relative to each other, that they're over the top. When I do that, this part now is free to move around. Now, if you've modeled your parts correctly, the second mate that we're going to do is another concentric mate between that and that. And this is now, these parts are now nicely aligned this way, top down. Now you would have had to have modeled your parts correctly for this to work. And then what I'm going to do is, to finish off and make these fully come together correctly, there's going to be a third mate that we're going to use. It's going to be one more coincident mate. Preemptively select coincident, and it's going to be orbiting around to look at the bottom of that face. and the top face of the 2x10 right there. And that mates together and drops that part to be in the correct position for the assembly. Now, once this is done, what I can use, I'm going to get out of mate mode by closing that out. I'm going to come to Insert Components, and I'm going to insert the 2x2 triple part. So I left mouse button click to highlight it in the Open Documents. I bring it into the model environment. I click one more time with the left mouse button key, and that's as if I've dropped the part right onto the table in front of me. And what we're going to do, we're going to try doing a different method of mates for this one. We're going to come to mates. And what we're going to do is use 3 different coincident mates to make this part come in. We're going to use a coincident mate. We're going to use this back face of that part, coincident to this face of the wedge. And you can see how that pulled together. I like that. I'm going to hit the green check mark. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this face and this face of the 2x10. I'm going to preemptively select, force that to be a coincident. Selecting that there. Notice the part kind of went downward as well. Now when I do this, I'm going to click green check. The part's kind of hanging out inside of this face here. Notice that I can left mouse button click and drag upwards. It now can no longer rotate in any direction, but it can translate up and down. And what we want to do to eliminate that ability for it to translate up and down is we're going to do one more coincident mate. So the 3rd coincident mate. If I orbit around to the bottom, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to select the bottommost face of the part of the 2x2 triple part. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, orbit around, and I'm going to select the top face right here of the 2x10 part. When I do that, it pulls them together. And there I now have, if I do a Control and 7 on the keyboard, I have what looks very similar to what is represented on page 15 of the assembly notes. Now what you're going to want to do at this point, probably sooner, would be to go File, Save. Make sure that you save it to a known location. So I can do, plane assembly, and Mr. Foreman, I recommend you do plane assembly and your name, and that's going to then save the file so that we'll be able to come back to it and continue to add parts to it. But that is how to assemble together to make it look like page 15 in the assembly.